20th, 2023. This evening we have 4 members of the planning board present, and Bob Schaffer is remote, so our votes this evening will be taken via roll call. We also have Director of Land Use Management Jeff Morissette, Town Planner Joe Gienowitz, and Police Chief Chambers with us this evening. Great. We will start this evening as we always do with open forum. Jeff or Joe, anything for open forum?
Just if anybody is here for 472, 476 Groton Road or 60 Pleasant Street, those applicants have requested to continue to later meetings of this board. And also this Saturday, March 25th at 10 a.m. is annual town meeting, Westford Academy Gym. So mark your calendars if you'd like to go and participate.
Thank you, Joe. I'll go to the board. Anything anyone on the board has for open forum this evening?
Nope.
Bob?
Nope.
Nope. Okay, I do not as well. Anybody from the audience have something for open forum? Please step to the microphone, state your name.
I'm deaf in one ear. Maybe you could speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Right?
Okay, we can certainly try to project a little bit more. Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks. If anybody from the audience has anything for open forum, please step to the microphone, state your name, your address for the record. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our standard agenda then. So this evening, we have one public hearing item, which is PB 2308, a definitive subdivision site plan review at 472 and 476 Groton Road. The applicant has requested to continue the public hearing without discussion to April 3rd, 2023, here in Meeting Room 201 at 7 p.m. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second to continue PB 2308 to April 3rd. All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Darren? Aye. And I say aye. That concludes public hearing items. We have a general business item, PB 2225, preliminary subdivision, public discussion about a preliminary subdivision at 60 Pleasant Street. The applicant, in this case, has requested we continue this item without discussion to the May 1st, 2023 meeting here in Meeting Room 201 at Town Hall at 7 p.m. Is there a motion to that effect?
So moved.
Motion.
I just want to state, staff, because we have never actually had any discussion about this, that this applicant needs to know I'm not here after that meeting. So do they want to close it and open it up with the new board?
So it's not technically a public hearing. There's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, is my understanding. It is only preliminary, so nothing the board does is binding. So I don't think they have worry in that regard. However, they're either going to go one way or another, and it's possible that this application may need to be amended entirely, or it may go away, or it may go forward. But they expect they will know by this last meeting date.
And since we have not heard any testimony on it or anything with the new board member, would she qualify to vote? Because technically we haven't done anything.
That's correct, and it's not a public hearing.
Okay.
So we would have free latitude for that, in my opinion.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second to continue PB 2225 to May 1st. All those in favor say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Mike? Aye. Darren? Aye. And I say aye. Okay. Which brings us to general business topic B. So we've been requested by the select board to review and provide input with respect to a possible zoning bylaw amendment relative to firearms businesses this evening. Jeff, would you like to open the conversation?
I'd love to, Mr. Chair. Thank you. So as you stated and is highlighted in the cover memo for tonight, the select board recently met on February 28th, 2023 to discuss a possible zoning bylaw amendment relative to firearm businesses. So draft language was provided to the board at that meeting for their conversation. While they did reach some consensus on some parts of the conversation, they were clearly divided on some others. And so they requested input from the planning board, who is well versed in many zoning bylaw amendments. And so they would like your input and opinion before they continue with their conversation, which is the reason we have tonight's agenda item. And so we have a number of items in the board's packet for consideration tonight. First, we took the information that we gave to the select board at their meeting of February 28th. We put that in your packet for reference, so you saw what they had in front of them. We also took the liberty of providing a takeaway document. We tried as best we could. You know, we're all human, flawed too, but that was our take on how we thought the select board reacted to the various points of conversation. In our opinion, in some cases, there might have been super majority consensus, others it was majority, and so on some matters it was pretty divided. And so we wanted to try to capture that so you knew exactly where the select board stood on at least the language that was before them at that time. We also have a GIS graphic that Joe can put up later. One of the select board members, and it was already on our radar, was to try to take a look at some of the possible buffers or setbacks to potentially sensitive receptors, to have that information visually in front of us so you could see from a practical standpoint what effect might that have on the opportunity for a firearm business to be sited in town in at least those 2 zoning districts. And so we have that. And then we also have a second version of a potential zoning amendment, which tries to capture some of the comments from the select board as well as some input from the public. Also, thanks to our GIS department, we have, hopefully, barring technical issues, some ability to look at those possible buffers. We can turn some of them on and off and maybe look at different setback distances, a limited amount, if the board has any interest in doing so. And let's see, we have received a number of, I'd say, earnest comments from the public asking why some of the various changes were made to the second version of the draft language for a potential zoning bylaw amendment. And I'd say there are several reasons why we did that. First of all is any zoning bylaw amendment typically requires a 2/3 majority vote at town meeting. And from our position, when the select board was reviewing this on several issues, they themselves did not have a 2/3 vote. And so we try to take a look at the feedback we received from the select board and maybe make some adjustments such that it might be more likely to attain a supermajority vote by at least the select board, who might be considering sponsoring a zoning bylaw amendment. Because in our opinion, if the sponsors of a zoning bylaw amendment, they themselves don't have a supermajority vote, it usually doesn't bode so well for town meeting. It's just a possibility. Some of the potential buffers or setbacks that were initially put out there, it was without benefit of us giving specific data to our GIS department. We wanted to take a look at some of the suggested buffers and see graphically what that might mean. So in other words, what would you be left with for areas to potentially site firearm businesses? And in some cases, in our opinion, we thought it was perhaps as or more restrictive than what was initially suggested for limitations. So, and then if you factor into that, you know, there's going to be other variables such as wetland resource areas. Some of the properties are clearly developed. Some of them might be subject to long-term restrictions that lend those properties not well to redevelopment for a business such as this. And then you also have variations like what is practically available on the market. And so when you look at all those things, in our opinion, if you include all those buffers as originally suggested, it could be deemed by some to be very restrictive and more so perhaps than originally intended. And then the last reason is we thought the decision makers and whether or not to sponsor a zoning bylaw amendment, if we gave a second version, you would then at least have a range of options and possibilities, more so than if we did nothing. And we think they would be in a position quicker to make a decision on whether to move forward or not. So we thought it'd be to everyone's advantage to have the added information to have perhaps a more efficient conversation to move forward, or not. And so we do have some questions outlined in the memo that we're looking for some specific direction from the planning board to give back to the select board.
Yep.
And so other than that, if you have any other questions, we're happy to try to answer them.
I had a question on your questions. Is that something that you want us each in our comments to attempt to address individually? Are you looking for a board consensus on those 5 questions?
I think it would be very helpful if, certainly as a board, but if there are dissenting votes, I guess it would be good to know, like, is it split 3-2, 4-1?
So I was going to ask, you want to get to the point of actually calling for a vote on each of these questions?
It would be nice to know the makeup.
Unless the board is
whether it's a formal
clearly-
vote or not,
Sure.
even if we can poll and see.
Okay. Okay, we can certainly get to that at the end of our comments and the discussion this evening.
Thank you.
Great. Is that it?
That's all I have.
Well, thank you very much. Chief Chambers, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having me.
Any comments from your perspective before we dive in?
Well, so first off, this whole process started at the beginning of January with Jeff and and I just wanted to bring it to the board's attention that I have two main reasons why I wanted to bring forward a bylaw. We understand that this is a very controversial issue within this town, both for and against, and I felt it was important to have guidelines that are clearly established, both for and against having firearms dealers within the town. So any potential firearm dealer coming to town knows clearly what the guidelines will be when they come in, and also those residents that feel strongly that firearms businesses should not be in town, they also know under what guidelines they'll be able to operate here. And then my main reason, and one of my greatest concerns with the firearms dealers within the community is I really I worry about having a situation similar to the mill building over in Littleton. And I know that there were comments made at some of the other board meetings, I believe at the select board meeting, about, you know, most of the dealers in there were not actively dealing. And I will agree with that. However, there were still 6 or 8 very active dealers over there. And unfortunately, you know, some of the information that I come across cannot be shared publicly through investigations and other things that they've dealt with over there. I really feel strongly that having several dealers within a building does create an atmosphere of concern that sometimes, well, essentially, I want to make the possibility of sharing inventory a little bit more difficult. Having those group builds, some of the information that I had really kind of brought those concerns to light, where there may have been conversations that were held over at the mill building that made some of our concerns that have been expressed in previous meetings a little bit easier to accomplish because of the number of dealers that were there and the types of equipment and accessories that were available there. So I think that it would be in the interest of public safety within the police department for inspection and record keeping and everything else, and to make it a little more difficult for those types of activities to happen, I felt it would be very beneficial to have a bylaw that, you know, restricts having several dealers within the same building.
Okay, understood. Thank you for that. Okay. Joe, any comments to add? No? Okay, great. All right, so go to the board. So before we commented, I thought how we might proceed this evening was, instead of starting with our discussion, perhaps we put some sort of a time block around comments from the public. We clearly have an audience here tonight probably who wish to express their feedback on this. I thought we might do that first to inform the conversation that we will then have, and then we'll have our discussion, and then we'll try to address Jeff's questions, if that works for everybody. Great, so we're going to go for public comments first in this case, which we normally do board dialogue and then go to public comment. What I'm going to attempt to do and what I'm going to ask is we probably have people on both sides of this issue who would like to comment this evening. So we're going to give this discussion about 30 minutes max, so that'll give us till about 8 o'clock. What I'm going to try to do is balance the conversation, giving both sides an opportunity to state their points. So what I would ask is whoever gets up first to comment, if that is for a zoning bylaw amendment or against, we will then see if there's somebody from the other side of the conversation who'd like to comment, and we will stagger the discussion that way if it's amenable to all of you. So with that,
Are you going to do time limits per
I
person?
one question for the chief, if I could.
Sure.
We have a chance. I've really learned a lot from his statement just then in terms of what the issue is with the aggregation of these into one area. I would like to ask him if he has a recommendation for how far apart he would like to see those.
Well, I think the proposed bylaw right now is a 500-foot buffer between, you know, I just think that having the way that the Littleton Mill was set up with many, you know, over 80 firearms dealers with, it was almost like cubicles and small office space. I think that if it's separate buildings separated by a buffer of a 500-foot buffer, it makes it a little bit more difficult, and you don't have that kind of collaborative groupthink or group build going on, and I think that's my main concern. I don't want to make it overly restrictive, because I do think that there's a place for firearms within the community, but again, I think the 500-foot buffer that had been discussed earlier in the proposed draft suits the needs.
Thank you. Bob,
Thank you, Rick.
you good with that?
Yes, no, I just wanted to get his opinion.
Yep, understood. Any other questions, Bob?
No, that's it.
Okay. Am I going to, I think we will ask for the public to be reasonably respectful of that there's probably multiple people who'd like to comment, and just, if somebody's going on and on, if you're not making new information available to the board, I'll ask you to wrap up and we'll move on, okay?
Or if somebody seems to be going on and on and on.
Yes, we'll get the hook out, right? Okay, so with that, the mic is open. The process here, you step up, you state your name and your address for the record, and you may comment on this discussion we're about to have. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your service to the community. There were a couple of things. I had originally...
Name and address for the record.
Oh, sorry. Alan Moyer, 69 Forest Road.
Thank you.
I originally had a question for our police department, but the chief has already answered it. Thank you. I am a Second Amendment supporter. I am not opposed to a zoning bylaw. I think on the presumption that these legal businesses are obeying the law, we want to encourage tax-paying businesses, and I do not oppose firearms businesses in Westford. However, I think the police department's ability to keep them legal, to keep us safe, is something that we all rely on. So while I'm not opposed to a zoning bylaw, I would be opposed to something that was so restrictive as to keep normal, ordinary, tax-paying legal businesses out of Westford. So I'll be brief. That's the end of it, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you very much.
Hi.
Hi.
Jennifer with Landry, Elmira Circle, and thank you for your time and consideration. And I am definitely not disputing anyone's right to own a gun. I am also not disputing the rights of the existing gun clubs to keep their current business functions. I am concerned about safe zoning, which is why we're here. And just as a brief background on gun shops and rights, I've looked at a number of legal precedents over the weekend, and the most helpful gun shop precedent may be the Ninth Circuit's, and I'm going to be very brief with this, the Ninth Circuit's decision in Texera versus Alameda County in California, in which the court rejected a would-be gun store owner's claim that a firearm ordinance precluded them from opening a gun shop anywhere in unincorporated Alameda County, sorry. So the key rulings were that the Second Amendment does not confer a freestanding right wholly detached from a customer's ability to acquire firearms upon a proprietor of a commercial establishment to sell firearms. So basically what they're saying is the Second Amendment does not protect the right to sell guns. Gun buyers have no right to have a gun store in a particular location as long as their access is not meaningfully constrained. So with multiple gun shops in surrounding communities, Groton, Lowell, what have you, Westford people who want to buy guns have no shortage of options to buy. And I feel like anyone who's going to turn this into a Second Amendment issue is, engaging in a false narrative, because it's not a Second Amendment issue. And we're a pretty viable community to do business in, so I think there are no shortage of businesses that want to locate in Westford. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening, Christy Bates, Pierce Avenue. I actually just want to clarify what is going to happen going forward, because I know that there was a hearing date posted for April 3rd to open the hearing for these bylaws. Is that true?
So is that on the select board's agenda?
A public
No, it hasn't been posted?
I would like to, no, our new town manager had put up a potential timeline if we decided to hold a a special town meeting.
Okay.
And that's where that came from.
Oh,
but
okay.
There's nothing
It's
in
not,
the
it
works.
hasn't been posted.
There's nothing.
I'm sorry.
There's nothing in
it
the
was,
works as to when it will
It was,
be.
that had been reported, so it was erroneous. So what is then going forward after this meeting? Does it then go to the select board on the 28th?
Yeah, I mean, I believe our comments would get sent back to the select board via town staff, and they would deliberate in their next meeting to refine any proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Is that right, Chad?
So we certainly can't say what the select board chair will or won't put on a given agenda, but our goal is, after we get the feedback tonight, we're going to send that out as early as we can, such that if they wanted to, they could meet and discuss it at their upcoming meeting.
And then from there, so there's no hearing date posted? You don't know what'll happen from there? No. It is the
Correct,
select
no hearing
board
date.
that would be proposing these bylaws? Is that, they would be submitting them on the 28th potentially?
So, if I may, this is the very first time that the planning board is discussing this matter. The select board was contemplating potentially sponsoring a zoning bylaw amendment. They wanted input from the planning board, so this was the first opportunity that we could get that input. We're gonna get it tonight, hopefully, and send it to the select board, hopefully by tomorrow.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yep, thank you.
At some point, I would like to discuss a timeline for this. I don't know that if you want to do it now or wait for when we have our discussion
Well, I
period.
think we should get to the part of the discussion, because one of the select board's questions is, would we be willing to co-sponsor? So I
I'll
think
wait.
we should probably wait till we get
Okay.
to that point.
Okay.
Please, good evening.
Hi, MJ McEwen, Morrison Lane. I want to first express my appreciation for your continued work on the bylaws pertaining to firearm businesses. We can see from Littleton's experience what having a lack of certain zoning bylaws can mean for their community, and their experience makes this work even more important, so thank you very much. I've had the opportunity to review the proposed bylaws, which were shared with the select board a few weeks ago, as well as the amended version being shared with the planning board for discussion tonight, which leads me to this topic. Westford has approved bylaws for adult entertainment businesses. The adult entertainment bylaws are stricter than what was being proposed for gun shops. Also, the Westford zoning bylaws related to adult entertainment businesses have a wider number of entities that require adult entertainment businesses to be set back from them than the proposed regulations of firearm businesses now do. The adult entertainment businesses must be set back from 1, each other, 2, residential districts, 3, public or private schools, 4, churches or places of worship, 5, established licenses under provisions of GLC 138 S12 where alcoholic beverages are sold in served. So I had a few questions about the changes. Why do we need more lenient bylaws for gun shops? One of the biggest changes was reducing the setback from 1,000 feet to 500. This is now a smaller setback requirement that Westford has for adult entertainment businesses, which is 750 feet. Why was the setback reduced for firearm businesses, and why is it less than we have as a community for entertainment businesses?
So, Jeff, I was not there for the select board's conversation. Did they consider the adult entertainment bylaws in their drafting, or giving you guys guidance to draft the proposed zoning bylaw amendments we have before us this evening?
So I don't recall that specific topic being brought up, the adult use district, but they did bring up, I think maybe 2 of them, they made reference to the registered marijuana dispensary, and they liked some language from that, which we did take some of the language where children commonly congregate, and in those cases, even to schools, that setback distance is 500 feet. And that's a much more recent zoning bylaw amendment than the one that you refer to.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Thank you. Good evening.
Elizabeth Hinkleman, 110 Groton Road, Westford. Am I
Yep.
good, close enough?
Yep.
You don't have to.
The mic picks up pretty good
Yeah.
for the camera, no worries.
I had a couple of different questions and concerns. One, I'm absolutely in favor of zoning to prevent what we saw in Littleton. One thing I saw in the discussion was there had been a proposed special permit requirement for gun sales businesses, and I noticed that that was altered to read site plan approval only. I know that the kind of site plan approval that's done by planning board doesn't touch a lot of the issues that were raised by Officer Chambers and So I'm wondering whether we really do need a special permit process that would have more input from select board, more input from possibly other groups. I don't have an answer how it should be structured, but I do feel strongly that we need to do our due diligence to prevent bad apples from showing up over here. In that connection, I would like if Officer Chambers would be able to clarify later what kinds of criteria might factor into the department's recommendations on potential businesses, business owners, above and beyond, conviction records for gun offenses or, I don't know, possibly other offenses. What kind of factors would you be in a position to take into account? And what would be areas that would need to be left for a special permitting process or things like that. So that's my primary thing. I also was concerned about the change in the setbacks. Given that we don't have a Second Amendment requirement to host this type of business, we should think, really carefully about what, if anything, is consistent with the spirit of Westford. We already have rejected various things. We've rejected marijuana dispensaries. We've rejected a state plan to put a cloverleaf intersection at Minot's Corner. We've chosen to preserve the agricultural area at the former Drew Farms, which we haven't quite figured out yet. But we do a number of things to create the character of the community. One is people hunt here, but the other is not ghost guns or, any of the shenanigans they got over there in Littleton. There are burdens to communities from firearm sales. There is studies showing increases in suicide by guns in areas where it's easy to purchase guns. There is a much wider area that's affected by any given location of gun dealers. In the Littleton case, the crimes that were committed with those guns were 30 miles away in Boston. If anybody would like the detailed references on that, we can send them along. But I would love to hear from the police chief about the burdens on their department and what issues they think would be deciding criteria and what needs to be left for a special permitting process.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's pretty broad.
It is.
So just
Yeah.
at its base, most of what the police department's going to be required to do is already established through law, through Mass General Law, Chapter 140. I think it's Section 121 through 140, govern all the firearms criteria. As far as the business itself, I don't have a lot of latitude when it comes to the licensing itself. If they qualify for their FFL, there's certain restrictions and things that I can consider when they apply for the local license. But again, that's all governed by state law and case law. So I do not have a lot of wiggle room on anything like that. The safety guidelines and everything else, that's one of the another reason for the bylaw is that they would be required to check in with the police department, have a safety plan that is approved through the police department. That is I think one of the points within it. So, those are all things that we can't get into I can't say exactly what all the safety recommendations will be. It is kind of site dependent, but it also is not something that we also advertise to the public what we require them to do for all the security measures. And depending on the type of building, we may require a little bit more, or sight lines. I've spoken with Jeff about some of the things that we have concerns with this particular site, where the planning board may want screening or bushes and different things for a site, whereas for the police department, we don't. We want to be able to have our cruisers be able to drive through, shine a spotlight, and be able to check on the business to make sure everything's intact. So we do have different criteria that we would be looking for. I hope that answers most of your question.
Okay, so you would not be the people to take into account if the police in Littleton had constant headaches with particular customers or particular businesses, or if you're not in a position to supervise individual transactions?
No, we are allowed through state law to go into the establishment once a year to check their records and books. There is state guidelines that we follow on that. I believe there's 21 points that are under Chapter 140, Section 123, that specifies exactly what we're allowed to look for when we go in there. I know I have spoken with Chief Bernard over in Littleton about this very issue. He was able to delegate it to an officer over there, but they had over 80 firearms dealers in that mill. Each inspection was taking 2 or 3 hours, and that was from an experienced officer that had a significant amount of experience doing those types of inspections. So there certainly is.
And they don't know what's going on the other 365 days of the year.
No. But between the police department and the ATF still does do inspections of licensed dealers as well. They can do spot checks. And there wouldn't be anything that would prevent us from reaching out to the dealer and asking if we can come in and check his inventory. It would be incumbent upon, it would be up to him whether he agrees to it or not, but.
Yes, Jeff.
After he's done, if I,
Oh.
because there's another part of the question.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch, but I think
Yeah.
it's easier to answer a more specific question than the kind of the broad,
So let me maybe ask a refining question. So I think one of the things I heard you mention is that there was not the applicant who was before us for the most recent application that was essentially approved by this board for the change in use at 359 Littleton Road. There was a case that I read about where one of the firearms dealers in Littleton did
straw purchase.
Yeah, straw
Yes.
purchase of a firearm that wound up in the hands of an underage person in Boston, and I believe they killed somebody with it. Will that have the consequence that that dealer will lose their firearms permit, the federal firearms
Absolutely.
license? Okay,
Yes.
so that would be
Yep.
the consequence.
Yeah, that is an absolute disqualifying event.
Yeah, okay, great.
When you're charged with the felony. So it does, state licensure follows along the same guidelines as federal. So if there's a felony, if you have a felony on your record, if you were adjudicated as a violent offender as a juvenile, you wouldn't be able to receive a firearms license. And there's some other slight differences, but if you have any violent history or have been convicted of a felony, you're not allowed to get a license as a dealer.
Right, so that's really the line, it's like convictions versus complaints versus.
Yeah, so one of the differences between firearms licensing for a dealer versus firearms licensing for an individual is the issue of suitability. So for an individual themselves, I can consider suitability when I'm issuing as a local licensing authority. I can consider whether or not they have presented a danger to themselves or others in the past, and there's other factors that I can consider before issuing an individual license. Under a dealer's license, I do not have that specific language built into the state law. There is a remedy for it that we can, I could always deny and get overturned by the state police, because that's the power of appeal. So it's not a shall issue, it is a may issue, but I also have to have specific actionable information to be able to deny. So a speculatory, whether or not this individual has participated in straw sales or ghost gun builds or anything like that, without any specific actionable information, I cannot use that in my determination.
So you can't use what kind of advertising they do?
I cannot. No, I cannot.
Okay, so in the interest of continuing to move through questions, you said you had one other piece.
Yeah, the first part of that question was why did it go from special permit to site plan? And so that was me, and I did receive some criticism for that. But tonight's discussion item is for planning board input. And so it isn't simply site plan review, it's site plan review with buffers and additional criteria. So I don't want you to think it's the run-of-the-mill site plan review. There's other things suggested that are specific to firearm businesses. And so in the interest of having as full a conversation as possible and getting as much input from this board, I thought it made sense to show that other end and other possibility with the additional, more stringent buffers and additional criteria.
Thanks, Jeff. Good evening.
Hi, my name is Titus Palmer, 15 Vos Road. I was initially going to ask if this was the appropriate time for questions, but I guess it is. I had three specific questions that I would either ask through you, the board, or directly to Chief Chambers if you'd like.
Through me.
But at a previous Selectmen Boards meeting, I did ask them to consider asking Chief Chambers to investigate the number of incidents that took place related to those firearms dealers over a 10-year period. I don't know if they ever did ask him or not. My second question, it relates to, he alluded there was information he had gained through investigations. So my question is, did any criminal charges to date come from that information that he can't share because it's part of an investigation? And my third question is, I understand his concerns with the intermingling of all the different businesses in that setting. But wouldn't clearly defined separate units in the same building provide the same segregation between business as the 500-foot buffer would? For instance, in one of our commercial properties, Bank of America leases space. That doesn't mean that the nail person at the other end of the building has access to the bank space. They're separate, self-contained units. So would a situation like that not accomplish the same thing without the 500-foot requirement?
So I will ask Chief Chambers if he'd like to answer those first two questions. I think the third one, I would say, would seem to be self-evident based on...
And I'm not implying I need an answer now, but I feel those are important elements that need to be considered before such a restrictive bylaw is even considered. So, I'll go sit, and if anybody has a follow-up question, I'll be glad to come back up, but...
So I have spoken with Chief Bernard over in Littleton. I do know that they did have several investigations that originated in the mill building. How many, I can't comment on. I didn't get an exact number from him. The second one was specific criminal charges. Well, I think that they just had the straw purchase one that came out of the mill, so there's a criminal charge right there. And sharing the same building with separate units that are clearly delineated, I think, is exactly almost what the mill building currently has. So what we want to prevent is walking around the corner and saying, hey, I have this build, he wants this. I think that it's important to have a little bit of physical separation, and it just makes it a little bit more difficult for that type of skirting the rules to occur.
Thank you.
Thank you, because I was going to have that question.
Please. Good evening.
Chris Kuntz, 14 Texas Road. I want to commend Jeff and his team for putting together these great documents, what was presented February 24th and then what was presented the 19th or 17th here. But I find that they're two completely diametrically opposed drafts of a bylaw. One was saying we would like to have gun shops approved by special permit. We want to have lots of space around, not having them interfering with churches, schools, those kinds of things. And I found the second one totally the opposite. And it struck me that the first night that this topic came up, there was a preponderance of people who were opposed to gun shops at all in Westford. And they didn't get the idea that we're going to have them, it's how to figure it out. But the second document, the rules looked like they were relaxed or changed in the draft in such an opposing way that I thought it looked like it was a preponderance of gun dealers or people who really supported guns wanting to have almost no regulation at all. And I think, we have opposites so much in this country, but I think we need to compromise somewhere in the middle. I know we're going to have them, but I would like to see them regulated. Personally, I'd like to see a special permit required as opposed to just having it be a site review, a planned business, that sort of thing. Especially because I view guns as being a little more dramatic. They can kill. Adult books can't kill, and yet the requirements are more stringent for establishing an adult bookstore in Westford than in the second proposed draft of the gun selling or gunsmithing laws. So I think it's important to compromise, perhaps. Maybe take a look at what was proposed for the adult bookstores. One draft said 1,000 feet, one draft said 500. The bookstores say 750. That's a compromise. Maybe it's something people can live with. But I think we need to take a look at that, because I think, guns have a bigger impact on the well-being of the community than, a little bookstore. And the other thing, and I beg your pardon if it's a repeat, but I couldn't hear what some of the other people were saying. In the second draft, there were comments. One of the reasoning for site plan review only was a perception requiring a special permit infringes on one's Second Amendment constitutional rights. There was that language in there. And also there was a section that talked about the rationale for the document. If there's a limit on the total number of businesses that can be allowed in town, this may be deemed too prohibitive if there's a crucial element of firearm business services not being provided. Well, frankly, it doesn't matter whether there's nothing critical about firearm businesses that has to be provided. Another statement was, one could argue the broad range of services necessary to support the use of firearms is not being provided. There's a difference. The Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms. It doesn't talk about the right to sell them or talk about defending businesses' rights to sell them, encompassing all of these other things. So if a gun selling store is in town, it doesn't matter if it doesn't provide full service. It doesn't mean we have to have or have to admit a full service one. If we have a special permit, there will be some regulation. At least someone will be looking a little more definitively at what the business is, maybe a little more effectively at what the background of the person is, what the business would bring to Westford. And I think it would give us a little more, balance to look at and evaluate, rather than just assuming it's our business as of right in the town. Excuse me if my brain is a little scattered. I just had surgery not too long ago. I'm a bit wheezy. So, anyway, thank you.
Oh, thank you. I think that was very clear. Yes, Jeff.
Just one quick thought is we intentionally provided two versions. We are, forgive the analogy, trying to thread the needle, and we thought it's difficult, and we thought we maybe gave some options maybe on both sides, and so that whoever maybe moves forward, maybe they have a range to sort of draw from to move something forward. So that was our intention.
Jeff, those comments specifically regarding how some could perceive that to be in conflict with their Second Amendment liberties and rights, was that from your staff's perspective, or was that offered as a perspective from town council in considering this draft?
No, so some of that is, I believe, whether it was correctly interpreted or not, based on some of the public comments we either received or at the select board meeting. It wasn't from the select board.
Okay.
So we tried to, I thought we captured it, we listed some comments from the public, so.
Yeah, I think it was comments from the public that believe that not having gun stores or not having gun stores freely admitted, et cetera, is an infringement of their constitutional rights or Second Amendment rights. And that has nothing to do with it. So I wanted to make sure.
And we were just capturing some comments that we heard. Yeah,
Thank
that's all.
you.
Great. Next up.
Hi, Jody Marchand, 6 River Street. Now, I know this is a zoning bylaw meeting, I understand, but I have to say I only heard about this shop that got approved after it got approved. And needless to say, having my daughter murdered in front of me by a gun, and having someone else murdered in their home 2 weeks prior, along with our country is known for mass shootings. So don't tell me, I'd like to know if it's, I hope, still possible that won't even be in this town. Is there a way to fight that? Because in my opinion, there is a problem with guns in our society, and I like to think my town of Westford does not agree to having guns in the town.
So your question is there anything that can be done for the already
Yes, are we,
approved business?
can it still be voted on that it wouldn't even be allowed in the town? If not, I'm appalled,
Yeah, no,
absolutely appalled.
so I'm tremendously sorry for your loss. Unfortunately, there's nothing that we can do about the
You're
existing
right,
application.
she's gone, there's nothing you can do, but yet how is it that people, how is it that this can be approved and they can't have a Walmart, or you can't have a drive-through coffee shop? Are you kidding? Is this am I really understanding this, right? Is this
Yes, you are.
correct?
Yeah, this is correct, yes.
This town of Westford, I am appalled, and I'd like to know how that I can get people on board with this, and there's gotta be something more we can do.
Yeah, I mean, we are going through the process of what we can do now, which is to, work on language, and then the thing that you can do is bring your neighbors out and vote
So-
at town meeting if and when this goes before town meeting.
So will this be talked about at Saturday's meeting, and will we get any, so we had no say, is basically what you're saying to me? It was voted on here, that it was okay? Are you
Yeah.
kidding?
Yeah, the application was for a change in use. It was not a zoning bylaw change, and based upon the criteria for a change in use before this board, we acted as we had to act. There was no opportunity for us to deny the application based upon what is stated in the zoning bylaws
But
present.
but you could deny Walmart coming to our town, am I understanding that right? Someone had told me that much. Or you could deny something, a restaurant going into where that
Okay.
Apple farm, Drew Farm was?
So I was not on this board when the decision was taken regarding the square footage limitation for a major commercial project, which is what limits, my understanding is what limits Walmart from coming here, is we will not allow a major commercial project over 40,000 square feet.
I think there can be a building of 60,000 square feet or in excess of 60,000 square feet.
So, yeah.
I mean,
I
that as an
understand.
example.
Yeah.
I just don't understand where our town is coming from. I'm in shock, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi, Paul Fossbender, 14 Texas Road. I'm happy to say most of my points have been eloquently covered by others. I did want to note one thing in the last draft that came out, the more that Jeff's group put together. The word, I think, firing ranges popped up in that. And that really, I guess, causes me to ask a bunch of questions. I believe the only firing range we have now is the Sportsman's Club, and they're off in the middle of nowhere or something like that, and they're regulated under something obviously that isn't going to be covered by this bylaw. How would someone have a firing range in a facility along Route 110?
Right.
And as whatever board and whatever process we use to approve it, I would really be interested in seeing how we're going to condition that to make sure that it's safe for the people there and for the abutters.
Yeah.
The only thing I could see looking through our current bylaws was in Chapter 95 with the general bylaws on firearms. And it helpfully says you can do a bunch of stuff provided that suitable precautions and safety measures have been taken to prevent injury or damage to persons or property outside or beyond such private property. I really think that's going to be inadequate for this. And as you go through the process, I'd really like to see something more concrete.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. You did have a question in there. I think there's actually technically two sportsmen's clubs in town. There's the Westford Sportsman's Club and then there's Stony Brook Fishing Game. And I think both of them have shooting ranges.
Were they permitted by some process, or are they controlled or inspected periodically, or?
I don't know the answer to that. I assume that goes back.
Haven't researched it yet, it goes back quite a ways.
Yeah. I think those go back quite a ways.
There apparently haven't been any big issues over the last 40 years, so, but.
Yeah. I believe Stony Brook Fishing Game actually has an indoor firing range as well as outdoor, Chief?
As does Westford Sportsman's. They do have a small indoor range as well.
So, I would assume, that this is me making an assumptive leap, that if we had a business before us and the zoning bylaws as we're considering them tonight were in effect, that would need to be part of the safety plan that would need to be reviewed and approved by the local police as part of the permitting process.
Okay, but that doesn't have to be part of the bylaw necessarily.
It's an interesting question.
Ideally, it'd be nice if there was an amendment that there would be more clarity going forward. We did have some suggested conditions, I think at least one of which relates to possible noise mitigation if there were a firing range. So they would have the ability, more so than they do now, to address noise issues, in my opinion. That doesn't fully answer your question, but we're taking notes.
Great, thanks, Jeff.
Thank you, Paul. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Bridget McDonald at 9 Muriel. My question is, should be pretty quick. So is there any reason why the buffer for residential was dropped from the select board draft? I know you talked about some things were dropped from but residential seems like it, I don't know.
I think what Jeff alluded to in his comments earlier is if you start to put all of the different places to have a setback from, and you made that 1,000 feet, you start to get into a situation where it's essentially an effective ban on having them anywhere, because there's literally nowhere that you can cite them, but I don't want to jump to that conclusion, Paul.
Along those lines, so it got, with just retaining the ones that we had and not including the setbacks to the residential districts, in my opinion, it was getting very restrictive. And so if we propose something too restrictive, then that has the effect of being deemed, whether in writing or not, too restrictive and prohibitive. And that could undermine potentially, this is one of the things that we have to look at. If it ends up being too prohibitive, it's very possible that the entire bylaw could be thrown out entirely, rather than the single section.
Right, so there's other towns that have buffers for like alcohol license holders, nursing homes, you know, apartment complexes, that sort of thing. So those aren't part of ours, or?
So every town is different. You could take literally the same categories of buffers and the same dimensional setbacks, and if you apply it to one town and another that's right next door, you may get wildly different results. So it's really town specific, and whatever, if there is an amendment and we look at whatever districts these uses would go into, we would have to make the specific analysis for our town, our zoning, and with those buffers. And we also have to keep in mind that some of the potential buffers, they change over time. So schools are more, you know, more permanent, say. But there's plenty of businesses where children commonly congregate in scheduled and structured activities that they pop up and go fairly fluidly over time. And so we also have to be mindful of those creeping in where we think even now there's plenty of opportunities. There may not be with just one business going.
So you're looking at places like Kimball's and how the distance of, you know, like say Kimball's, which would be, you know, a lot of kids.
So if
Symbols you didn't have as a child place.
we did not list Kimball's, if you hold on one second, we have, let's see, I think we had about 10 or a dozen businesses or so. Let me see. Some of the ones that we looked at, just quickly, we looked at Owl Therapy, Mathnasium, Spotlight, Dance Academy, World Class, Martial Arts, Achieve Taekwondo, Empower Athletics, Neshoba Gymnastics, formerly One Stop Fun, Goldfish Swim School, We Rock the Spectrum, CodeWiz, Kumon Math and Reading Center, and Sylvan Learning Center.
And so those are all within like the buffer is it 500 or?
That is what is currently shown on that map, yes, with a 500-foot buffer.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Sure.
Good evening.
Good evening, Arnold Price, Oak Hill Road. And through you, Mr. Chair, I have a question for the chief.
Yes.
Chief, is your, I don't know if I heard you say this, but is one your main concern, I know you have several, having them in a cluster, like in one building?
That is one of my one of my primary concerns, yes.
And in regard to what someone said earlier, I think it was Chris Kuntz, which I think was very eloquent, that I think everything is based on compromise. And she stated that, and I agree with that. I am, personally, if you ask me, I would be in favor of just site plan review, because, correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Chair, you can make that restrictive. The board can, not you, personally.
Under site plan review, we do have the ability to condition an approval and Yeah, we can condition the approval.
As long as it's tied to criteria and standards spelled out in the bylaw.
Correct.
Right. And, you know, there was a question on Walmart and what have you. We have, in Westford, shooed away a lot of business, like the marijuana dispensary, Walmart for another one. We didn't get Walmart, but we ended up with Cornerstone Square, which is, you know, a lot of businesses, which is great. Parking is a little difficult to navigate, parking lot. But we tend to shoo away business here in town. I've been in town for over 40 years.
Yep.
And I don't think it's time for us to shoo away more businesses, that's all. Thank you.
Yep, thank you. Good evening.
Hi, I'm Lisa Nikosh in Holsburg, 6 Betty Lane. I believe I heard you mention a study about increased suicides in communities with guns nearby. If I could get that information, because I've been hearing from others that there is no such association. So I'd just like to get the facts for future conversation. I also want to acknowledge and respect that you are hearing what I asked you a few weeks ago, which was to acknowledge that we've got folks who are concerned about gun safety, and we've got folks who also are responsible gun owners in this community, with not one gun club, but 2. So based on how the conversation went last time, I'm really hoping that the town makes an effort to really engage folks in this conversation. And so I think these hearings are great, but I think there's something more that can be done. And what I mean by that is, for example, the town set up like a Zoom call for the League of Women Voters to present information about town meeting last week. I think that's cooperation, collaboration. I think the town could also reach out to both gun clubs and have a conversation. I'm wondering if there's a way to engage that dialogue so that responsible gun ownership, safe gun ownership can be respected while life safety is also at the forefront, right? It hurts me, you have no idea how much it hurts me to hear you speak. We all heard for you bring that in now. So I don't want to ever hear that kind of thing happen here again, but that's what it's about, having the conversation on both sides. I'm convinced there are really good people here who make this place a peaceable community. So every time I hear about a break-in around my neighborhood, I also know there are folks who are not concerned about protecting themselves. I think that makes it a more peaceful community in some regard. So I'm just asking that the town think about ways of reaching out and having that conversation, because I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can get there, because if you're looking for a 2/3 zoning vote, I don't think we're going to get there with the number of gun owners in town. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hi. Diane Wood, 122 Depot. I got several emails today from acquaintances and voters in town in general, very disappointed in the watered-down version of this most recent zoning bylaw draft. In so much as it's really a risk discussion. So, you know, land use, Jeff and I have spoken, and I do understand the concern. However, I don't know if Jeff really land use really has looked at the town of Newton, city of Newton. And
As one of the municipalities, we looked at their bylaw, yes.
And how strict they were, and they were not challenged. So I'll throw that out there and say they did something, and they were not as concerned, they were not as risk averse, let's put it that way, about being prohibitive and about being restrictive in their community. We're not Newton, clearly understand that. But I ask you to seriously look at that. And the whole special permit discussion versus use by right, agree with some of the people in the audience who have spoken. And those towns that are putting in, trying to draft zoning bylaws in this area are coming at it from the special permit, not from the use by right. The whole topic is an unknown right now, and I don't know why we would err on the side of being extremely open, not open, but have it very not tight. The whole topic of gun laws in Massachusetts and towns is new. There are things that we don't even know at this point. So we're going to make decisions now that may impact us in the future. And I'm concerned about that. So start off small and then tight and then loosen up. Last but not least, can you validate the process as it relates to, I understood that once we have a public hearing and we go through that whole process, that if there are applications out there in the interim during that window, so this may take a while, that until that application owner got a occupancy permit, that the town could negate all of that, and they would have to abide by the new zoning law. Did that make sense to that?
Jeff, if we were in the process of drafting or considering zoning bylaw changes, what would happen to applications in the process?
So in my conversations with town council, and some of it would depend on the specific language, if there is a zoning bylaw amendment.
Yep.
It would depend on how it's worded, but generally speaking, if an applicant comes in and gets approved and they're up and running before there is a zoning bylaw amendment, or before there is the legal ad published in the newspaper for that, they are in legitimately, and they will not be bound by that. They're already in. If someone comes in when town meeting votes and say it's a favorable vote and it survives review by the Attorney General's office, that bylaw would be effective to the date of town meeting vote. So now the question is, what happens to assuming a successful zoning amendment, AG approval, the bylaw becomes effective at a town meeting. So the question is, what happens to those applications or businesses that come in between the public hearing notice getting published and the date of town meeting vote? And so our understanding right now is that if an applicant comes in after the public hearing notice is published, they are assumed to have notice, and they may be subject to zoning enforcement. In other words, to come into compliance with the bylaw if they can, and seek whatever permissions or relief may be needed. And again, that's a general viewpoint. It does depend on the specific language of that bylaw, and if it survives the AG and the language is unchanged. But generally speaking, they may not receive grandfathering protection if they come in after the hearing is published, the notice of the hearing.
The city of Newton did have an extensive, some people may have seen it, website with a lot of this information. Having said that, however, they had an FAQ, which was great. It listed no fewer than 20 questions that would apply to almost every community. There may be details, I agree, and a few differences, but it was a great FAQ that people could refer to, and they were just questions: what happens if we do this? Does this apply? Does this not apply? I found it very helpful, so thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we've gone over time. You're coming up for a second comment. Are you looking to make a comment as well? Okay, let's give somebody who has not spoken an opportunity to please come up. State your name for the record, and name and address.
Melissa Palmer, Westford. I find that this proposed bylaw is unfair at its core, and no one has really given any substantial facts about why there needs to be more regulation, additional regulation, than what's already in place for any gun shops.
Thank you. Yep.
So Jennifer Willandria, I'm the area circle, and I was debating about whether or not I was going to share any public health data, but since a question was asked, I'm just going to share a couple of very brief statistics. In relation to suicides, the Harvard School of Public Health just published an article on January 3rd of 22, I believe. In Massachusetts towns where there are more guns, there are more suicides. Pretty reliable source. Also, the Scientific American published an article, 11/3/21. I'm happy to forward all of these citations. When a gun shop comes to town, there is a 3.9 increase in homicides in communities within a 100-mile radius. That happens over time. When gun shops leave town, homicide rate goes down. So what I wonder is, how much does it cost the Westford Police Department to address one suicide, to investigate one homicide, in addition to the trauma that it causes the community? Rhetorical question, but I'm asking people to think about that. Also, with domestic violence, which is one of the leading causes of death for women and children in some cases, unfortunately, as well, guns are the frequent weapon that leads to deaths? How many restraining orders are filed in Westford? How many guns are involved? How much risk is there to law enforcement? I have family members who work in law enforcement, and domestic disputes are the types of situations that they most least likely want to walk into. And one of the reasons is risk to them as well as the family. So I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I was not familiar with the Harvard Business Review article you cited, but I did read that Scientific American article.
Yeah, Harvard School of Public Health, and
Yeah,
I'll
but
forward it.
You know, but that Scientific American article, I believe that study, though, was done in neighborhoods, disadvantaged neighborhoods, specifically with heavy minority populations, which I can think. No, I'm saying I can think of a lot of adjectives to describe Westford. Disadvantaged is not one of them. So,
Okay.
thank you.
So, sure, I'm sure there's lots
Just-
of conclusions that can be drawn from the article. Also, the Harvard School of Public Health study was done specifically in Massachusetts in general.
I'm definitely interested.
Okay, so we'll forward that. And what I also want to mention too is there was a reference made to Newton, and the folks that were involved in passing the legislation in Newton included highly prominent attorneys from firms like Ropes and Gray, Mintz Levin, and I have a ton of information from that group that I'm happy to pass on. That I think would back up every single claim that I'm making. In addition to that, we were talking about other communities and what they've done and not done, and the city of Cambridge has completely eliminated gun shops. So it is possible to do that, and all I'm asking for is some simple, adaptations to zoning bylaws. I'm not even asking to eliminate them entirely.
Thank you. I think this will be our final comment, and then we'll go to the board for discussion. Good evening.
I will try to keep this brief.
That's okay.
Jeff Pearson. I live on 59 Monadnock Drive here in town. So a couple things. Chief Chambers, you might be familiar with this book right here. This is a little outdated. Can I just show you so you can read the title?
Well, you should say the title for everybody.
Yep. I want to make sure he understands. This is the Law Enforcement Guide to Firearms Law. This is actually a copy from 2000, and it is an abbreviated copy. It's designed specifically so that police officers and the rest of us can actually understand the law. The actual law book would probably be about 3 times this thick. Okay, so this covers everything. How we can go about owning a firearm in this state, how retailers can go about operating their businesses in this state, penalties for violating any of those laws. And actually, to the case in Littleton, sir, what is the penalty if you are convicted of unlawfully conducting a straw purchase or gun trafficking? What would be the penalty for that, sir?
Felony charge. I don't know what the prison sentence is.
Last time I checked,
5 years or more.
Okay, and last time I checked, I think it was about 10 years. That's a pretty strong incentive to not break the law. Unfortunately, we did see a case where somebody did, and they're going to be paying some fairly serious penalties for it. My point being is that we have some pretty strict laws already in this state governing the sale and use of private possession of firearms. To that point, this is courtesy of Jim Wallace. This is not a published document. Jim Wallace is the executive director of the Gun Owners Action League. And a few years ago, he put this together. This is a list of the steps anyone who wants to purchase a firearm in this state has to go through, starting with, I've never owned a firearm, to actually buying one. And a couple of the steps have changed, but predominantly there are about 33 individual steps required, starting with going to a class, paying for the class, passing the class, putting in an application in with the police department, getting fingerprinted, having background checks performed. And by the way, a lot of that is then repeated every time you purchase a firearm. There's federal forms you have to fill out. There's additional background checks. They cover things like, do you have a restraining order out against you? Have you been convicted of domestic violence? It's a federal form. If you lie on it, it's a felony. Okay. Also, other interesting points. This is the Scientific American article that you were referring to. I had a look at this. Now, of my life experiences, A couple of them are. I actually hold an advanced degree in what is called a pure science. So I've spent a fair amount of my time reading actual scientific articles. This is not a scientific article. It references a study, and the problem is, when it references that study, it immediately, and this is probably one of the few honest things they did in this article, they state that the study had never been peer reviewed. In the scientific community, that's a huge red flag right there. And kind of to the points they go on, they tend to go back to Chicago an awful lot as a site, as an example of, see, we've got gun stores here, and look at all the crime in Chicago. Look at all the shootings and firearm-related crimes in Chicago. The study doesn't cover areas like this, like Littleton, Chelmsford, the suburban communities. It's mostly the inner city. And unfortunately, Ms. Lightfoot, who is leaving office, is one in a long line of mayors who have failed to address violent crime in the city. So it's convenient to blame the gun stores and the guns, and probably the biggest detractor to that claim is a lot of the gun stores they're citing are in Wisconsin. So if this is really a problem, why don't we see the same levels of violent crime in Wisconsin? They said it's in a 100-mile radius, but look, it's just Chicago.
Okay. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
Are you cutting off, or is it
are you?
The only other thing, there's one last thing. I just want to address the, actually, two very small things. Ranges. Ranges are actually very highly regulated. There has to be setbacks of about 500 feet from property line, from any public way, from private homes, private residences. The two sportsmen's clubs in this town have a very vested interest in being good neighbors to everyone in the community. They don't want to put themselves in a position where people are unhappy with them. As to the suicides, suicide, sir, is a little different than homicide, in the sense we have to treat them differently. Is that correct? Absolutely. So with a suicide, do you take the rope away?
What?
Do you take the sleeping pills away? Yeah. So you can't take the tool away and expect, it has to be treated differently. And if you actually want the correlation, let's take a look at Japan. Japan has almost no private firearm ownership, zero. They have the highest suicide rate in the world. So you kind of need, you have to, there's more to it, is my point. You have to look at, a lot
You've made your
more.
point. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, sir.
Yep. Okay, I said that was the final comment. I am calling it. We went at least 25, 27 minutes longer than I had intended for the question and answer section, so I would like to give the board a chance to actually do our deliberation and get our job done this evening. So, all right. So,
Do you want to go? I'll let you go.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, do we want to go through the questions first, or go through the bylaw first? With comments about individual sections? Or?
I figured we would do our usual, each of us takes our pass at, our feedback on the bylaw. And from that, we would maybe answer some of these questions, or I'd get a general sense of where the board was sort of leaning on these questions. But then at the very end of our comments, I figured we'd go through the 5 questions.
Okay.
Sort of officially, because Jeff would like us to even potentially vote on that.
Sounds
I'm being
good.
selfish, but yes, that would be easier.
Oh, I get it. Okay, so obviously we've heard 2 very different sides of opinion on this evening, and I expect that will continue throughout any conversations we're having on this topic. Is there someone who would like to go first this evening?
I'll go, I don't mind.
All right, Mike.
So, am I answering the questions? Sorry.
Well, or
Just
do you
my
have
overall
comments?
thought of the
Overall thoughts on the
okay,
bylaw.
Overall thoughts on the
Yeah.
bylaw. Well, let me begin in that, I think as Dylan did, I did a lot of research this weekend, and I found all sorts of studies that completely contradict each other. And depending on how you want the facts to look, you can find a study to do so. I read today, the National Institute of Health, it was a government agency, had a study, was done on in August of 2022, could find no association between retail gun sales and changes in crime rates. So I know everyone says that, the more gun stores, the more crime. I mean, who knows? Who knows what's there to believe? Personally, I feel that there should be a site plan review. Up until I heard Chief Chambers, I wasn't for any setbacks, but would be agreeable to the firearm business. And the reason behind that is I don't feel that the gun stores are unsafe. If I did feel they were unsafe, then I would not want them next to a liquor store or a child care facility or an adult bookstore, right? If they're going to be unsafe, then we should do what we can do to ban them. I've got a friend who owns a shop in Hudson, New Hampshire, and the things that he has to do to get licensed and to be inspected by the ATF, and it's amazing the steps that they go through. And I'm not saying they're bad steps. We need those protections. So I also don't believe there should be a limit of the total number of firearm businesses in town. Again, I think that it's market-driven, right? I do think that shouldn't be one building with 80 licenses, but if there's space on 110 and landlords can get rent them and they're going to pay taxes to the town and they're regulated, I don't know why I would limit them. And should we sponsor? I wouldn't be amenable. I would be amenable to planning board sponsoring the bylaw. I did have a question, Jeff, of the 6.6.3 applicability authority. Firearm business shall not sublease to any tenant of any building or structure, or is prohibited from subleasing the firearm space. Is that just? I was unclear on what that the meaning behind it was.
So just that if, I guess the intent was if you have a firearm business, it's that one firearm business, and
You
they
can't
won't-
have other dealers in there.
Yes.
Okay. But it's not that they can't sublease space from a tenant of, like.
They can lease a space, but we don't, and maybe it's not worded clearly enough, but the intent is to prevent multiple or different firearm businesses from occupying or sharing.
Cubicles of firearm, okay. So those are my comments, those are my thoughts, that was my only question on the proposed.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Anybody care to go next? Sure. Darren?
Yeah, so I think I would be in favor of site plan review with the additional conditions that we have, that are proposed.
Yeah.
Not just a general site plan review, but specifically for this type of business. I'm in favor of the setbacks, as I read it, mostly to prevent the mill situation, which the chief addressed as well, which I think we all agree with. So I'm not opposed to a limit in the number. 3 doesn't, I'm not opposed to a 3 necessarily. It's kind of an arbitrary number, but I saw the rationale to get there. I'm not opposed to that. Jeff, I saw some reference to, I'm not sure if it was the previous version of insurance. Was that taken out of the second draft? It was going to require someone to have insurance of up to $1 million.
Like $1 million.
That's in there on page 5, so 6.6. It's still in there, 6.6.8.
Let's scroll to that.
9, no firearm. That ensures it must have insurance for the applicant against liability for damage to property or injury to or death.
So I'm just curious if there's any other business that's subject to something like that.
The only one that I may be aware of is the asphalt plant.
My only reason for asking it is because I don't want that to negate the rest of the bylaw that's in there. If someone was to say, hey, listen, no one else has held to this standard, if it's severable, then fine. I just don't want that someone to come back and go, hey, this is overburdensome.
Yeah.
So that was a question I had for you, Jeff. So that one I would look at before putting that in there to make sure it would be okay.
I wonder if it's part of a license application anyway.
Probably.
I don't know if the chief knows.
Right. And if that is the case, then it wouldn't necessarily be in there, but, that was just something I thought would be potentially an issue, but, those are my main questions.
Great.
Issues.
Thanks, Darren. Kate?
Okay, special permit versus site plan review. That's a tough one. I'm leaning towards site plan review, but then as we were here listening to people, I was thinking about other parts of our zoning bylaws that do require special permits. But our criteria for the special permits they're all zoning related. And it's the way for us to do a back and forth discussion with an applicant about how to affect changes in the proposal related to land use to make it better for the town. And I'm not sure, I think there's some good suggestions here for criteria for the site plan review above the regular site plan review. And what else land use related? I mean, we are a land use board. What else could we put in here if it were a special permit that would go above and beyond our authority to look at? So that's my concern with doing it with a special permit. It would be interesting. I know, Jeff, you took like the aggregate of other towns, and I think before we get into a final discussion of what to propose for a bylaw, it would be nice to get the concrete examples from other towns, like if they have special permit criteria, what do they have for the special permit criteria, and how do those, what's different between them versus what we're putting in as an explicit site plan review criteria. So, you know, not tonight. I mean, we're not finishing this process tonight, and I know there are people who want this done yesterday, but this ain't gonna get done. It's not gonna get done in the next month. It's not. I think we'll be lucky to have anything for special town meeting. I think it should be more for a regular town meeting, because that's where we do zoning bylaws, but I appreciate sometimes we do them in the fall town meeting. But anyways, that's my thought on the special permit. The preamble purpose stuff, I'm not sure what disruption of peace and quiet enjoyment of the community, what that has to do with the business, like you alluded to. And I did review general laws 140, 122 to 131Y. And I do want to thank you for improving their definition of gunsmith. Theirs is lacking. And so I thank you for that.
But theirs is law, so, I mean.
Yeah, but we can improve, we can add to it, you know. It doesn't meet any other, I looked online for other definitions of gunsmithing, and theirs is severely lacking. Oops, wait a minute.
So can I ask
Yeah.
a clarifying, so you're more in favor of site plan review than special permit?
I am, but I could
Could be persuaded.
I could be persuaded.
Depending on the criteria situation,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, can I lend, so I had the same thought as you, which would be if it was a special permit, what are the additional controls that can be put around that? And one of the questions that I had coming into tonight, but I think I already heard my answer, is, you know, would there be a way if somebody was to, if a firearms dealer in town was to sell to a straw buyer, would that be something we could tie to the special permit and say that gives us an opportunity to revoke it? But based on what I learned tonight, it seems like that would be the least of that person's problems. So
I don't think it's our purview, because they're not going to be able to
Right.
get the approval from the chief.
Right. Or in that case, they've committed a felony, they're
Yeah.
going to be on the way for
They
15
have-
years and
like I
losing
said-
their federal license.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like yourself, I'm struggling to find out what are the additional
Yeah.
provisions we could put around a special permit.
Right.
Right. I'm with
That are within our purview.
Right.
So, and I had the same question that Mike had about 663, number 3, firearm businesses shall not be considered or allowed as accessory uses to any other use, or the thing with renting. Oh, no, it's the subleasing. And I think that needs to be looked at, and what you're really saying, I don't see why they couldn't sublease from a tenant, but as long as they, that's tough, because
Well, I think
they
it-
would have to come to
They have to
us.
see the chief, and they have to have security, and have to be separate, so. if it's
And would,
sublet-
and would the subleasing, would they have to then come to us because it might be a change of use? And I think the thing that should really be in there is they cannot sublease in a building that already has another firearm business in it, is what I think the intent is that you meant. So we should look at that wording, like what did you really mean?
I think that language was actually politely stolen from another
Okay.
municipality, but we should be clear about what.
Yeah. Setbacks, I have no problem with removing the setback to residential, because I was looking at the zoning, and the business, the buildings that could have a back door are generally facing 495. So they're not going to cross the highway to get to somebody. The businesses on the other side of 110 are more generally like marketplace, whatever they're called. They don't have back doors that the customers can use. So to me, that would be a reason to have a setback, if a customer can walk out and easily walk to a residential, whereas these buildings, they're all just, you have to exit on the 110 side. So, and there's wetlands and between a lot of these buildings and residential, so, but, you know, if people can give me a good reason, I'll be here, but, there was some more stuff. I know it makes everybody feel good to have setbacks to schools, churches, and childcare facilities and such. What does it really mean? If a guy wants to do something, they're gonna walk the 400, they're gonna walk the 1,000 feet. They'll drive their car. You know, a setback, but if it makes people feel good, fine. I have a concern. You did a lot of businesses. You talked about turnover in businesses. And some of the businesses that you used for references are ones that I could see a lot of churn. So I wouldn't necessarily, I think they're good for, I don't know if it's just a business like Kuman's or something, is it appropriate to say, oh, this is a business that caters to tutoring kids? Is it appropriate to say you can't have it within 500 feet of that, but it's okay to have one within 500 feet of Home Goods or Marshall's where the kids are going to go buy clothes, you know? So I'm squishy about. I don't think it's really worth including that kind of stuff. But churches and schools, those are things that are general, and I think they're already in the public mindset, so I'm okay with those. The comprehensive signage plan, I had some questions about the limitations imposed in that section. It's, the applicant shall submit a comprehensive signage plan, graphics, symbols, or images of firearms, blah, 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 shall be allowed only if the planning board determines that such signage would not be inconsistent with other criteria. what did I have for my comment there? I didn't really understand all of this. Why would it, like, inconsistency, and related to this with respect to signage, it was saying that we had to approve color and text size, font size, and things like that. And as I recall, when we were generating our sign bylaw, we were explicitly told that we were not allowed to regulate those kinds of things because of free speech.
So the intent of the first half is for each applicant to talk about whatever signage they want to have, because conceivably things like signage or lighting or landscaping could be influenced by police department review. And so it made sense to us at least to think about signage in case there could be some conflict. In terms of the second half, that language was actually provided by council. So in other words, as you alluded to, you know, we have First Amendment rights, and so.
Maybe not second, whatever amendment it is that Chris
So-
always
So
cited.
anyhow, there are limitations on what we can regulate for signage, but we think there should at least be a conversation about signage such that, you know, the last thing we want is to have a public hearing process with an applicant for a firearm business, go through that process, get their approval, be done, and then find out, oops, this isn't good for the chief security plan. We want to make some changes to either the landscaping is an easy one to think of, but lighting, which is certainly within your purview, and signage, I don't know. It's possible it could fall under security plan. I don't know, but we're just trying to prevent, we're trying to maximize the one-stop planning and review, look at it once, approve it once, and not have conflicts that would maybe make an applicant have to come back to the planning board again after they've concluded the public hearing process.
So maybe all of that needs to be reworded so that signage has to also be reviewed by the police department.
I think that's good.
There was also the question on the number of permits, and I've seen it both ways in this. There's one way in the bylaw, and then there's another way in the discussion. Like you were mentioning, in the bylaw, I think it says it's not per business, it's that you can only have 3 licenses or 3 permits, whatever.
We were suggesting businesses, but one business could hold multiple licenses.
Yeah, but we need to check the language in here because the language makes it so it's tied to the number of licenses, not the number of businesses.
Okay, we can check that.
Yeah,
It's
and.
not the intent.
Yeah, just so. And as for, I appreciate the not having more than one in a building. I think that's good. I'm a little squishy when it's something like Marketplace.
Westford Valley Marketplace.
Yeah, thank you. Westford Valley Marketplace, where they're in the same building, but they're not in the same building. You can't walk down the hall, but I can appreciate, like in the other buildings, like across further down, where you have multiple tenants in a multi-story building, I can see definitely that. I'm not sure about the 500-foot buffer between businesses. If they're in separate buildings, isn't that just as good as having a buffer between buildings?
Oh, if they're side by side, kind of feast for,
Yeah.
in my opinion. If you can walk out your front door and walk in their front door and within 5 steps, it's similar to having a cubby that's 5 steps down the hallway.
Yeah, I was just thinking the way that all the business buildings are set up on 110, I wasn't sure that was actually needed, but, so. Those are my, let's see, were there anything else? It was interesting, you had, "In no case shall any fire business be open to the public before 9 a.m. or remain open after 7 p.m." And I was just curious, was that just a number you threw out, or?
There was discussions with so this, first of all, possible limitation is for access to the public. It's not intended to prohibit the business owners from conducting business or, say, working, in their office or, assembling anything. It's hours of operation for foot traffic, and that was based upon some input from the police department and ease of patrol.
Okay. No, it makes sense. I think it's appropriate that the planning board does sponsor it, so. Since it's a zoning bylaw, if we don't think it's worth sponsoring, then it's, I hope you all say we don't think we should have one, but anyway. That's it.
Thanks, Kate. Bob?
Yes. So, let me just start. I have one request regarding the aggregate statistics that were provided. I would like to see those statistics if the town of Littleton was removed, since I think the town of Littleton is an outlier. So I'd be just curious to see what that does as we discuss the number of licenses.
What do you mean by aggregate statistics?
Well, they talk about how many licenses to sell firearms, ammunition in other mass towns. When they did the average number of firearm licenses.
Yeah, there was some stats provided.
So we can certainly provide that. I know statistically, this goes back to college days, certainly Littleton is an outlier. It's number one by far, with the close second being Bridgewater at only 20 some odd. But even though statistically we could probably discount it, it doesn't, to us, we weren't going to do that because they're a neighboring community, and we thought we should include that at least up front. We can look at, if we remove some anomalies, but we thought up front we should at least include it because they are a neighboring community, and it does weigh in on this discussion.
No, I have no problem showing both. I'm just curious to see what it does when you remove this outlier.
We can do that.
But anyway, with that said, my questions, comments really are limited to section 6.5 after the excellent job Kate just did. My first question has to do with section 4, and I'm just a little confused by 4A. The application is for a new applicant and change of applicant for an existing firearms business. I'm trying to parse that sentence, a new applicant for an existing firearm business.
So
does that mean, try to indicate there we wouldn't waive it for a new applicant for a new business?
So hypothetically, sorry, Bob. So hypothetically, say a firearm business comes in, they set up a shop, 10 years go by, and say if there are buffers, say a business comes in that would create a buffer to that, and if a new business were coming in, you might not allow it. But if there's an existing firearm business there, and say the owner is retiring and they're turning over, the shop or something to a successor, it's technically a new business. They may need an updated security plan, but it could be a way for the board to waive a buffer if there is a buffer requirement for an existing, where there has been an existing firearm business.
Thank you, understand.
You mean
and then the only other question,
for one that had been grandfathered, you mean?
Not grandfathered per se, like say there is a bylaw, one gets approved and comes in, and then say there's a turnover or another firearm business wants to come in their place. So it'd be a different firearm business, whether providing the same exact services or not, going into the location of a previously approved firearm business that's vacating.
Yeah, but
And a daycare had moved in between. Right.
Oh, I got you.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. I was confused.
All right, so my next, I only have one other real thought here that I want to discuss, and it's a little more complicated. I'm looking at some potential inconsistencies in 665, 1 and 2, and how the distances are measured. What I originally caught on to this, but Kate just gave me another example with Westford Valley, the Westford Valley
Marketplace.
Marketplace is located now. We measure from the building, the business being proposed. We measure from the structure, but for all these items in 6651, the other businesses, we measure to the property boundary, and that's fine, I think, for A through D, but we're measuring inconsistently the distance between two firearm businesses based upon when they made their application. And it just seems to me, should we be measuring firearm business distance between the structures as opposed to the structure and the lot line?
So I think, I think as worded here, because of the phrase accepting an existing firearm business, I think we're explicitly saying that from firearm business to firearm business, it would be measured from the structure to the structure. But for the other uses, it'd be measured from the structure of the proposed firearm business to the lot containing those other uses.
Okay. Okay. I see that. The last question I have to now ask is, in a case like Westford Valley Marketplace, where it's a large property, we've got a number of, we have all of these businesses here. Again, what if we had a child care center or a small church could be in one of those spaces at one side end of the property? We are, again, measuring the firearms business, not to the storefront location, but we are measuring it to, I think, the Westford Valley Marketplace lot. Is that correct?
That is correct. However, I do believe under subsection 6654D, if there's a circumstance whereby the board feels, practically speaking, like say you could have a significant separation distance between the proposed business and a setback, if you feel as though the purpose and intent of providing that separation distance is provided, this is assuming there is even any buffers and a bylaw, that you could waive that if you can make, that finding that the practical purpose of that section of the bylaw is satisfied because maybe they're 1,000 feet apart, even though maybe two buildings on the same or, adjoining lots are, under strict reading, it wouldn't meet the separation distance, but maybe you feel practically speaking it does, you could have the ability to waive that.
So I agree with what you just said, but I don't think that is what 4B is intending. I think we might have to add an additional item in that list of provisions that would allow for what you just described, Jeff.
Okay, we're happy to look at that.
Yeah. No, because I didn't see how we handled this, and Kate got me thinking about Westford Valley Marketplace, which is one of our larger properties. And so, okay, I'm fine otherwise. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.
Can I add one follow-up on that one?
Yeah, please.
So Jeff, what if there is a situation where on the first floor there's an existing and then someone goes to propose on the second floor? Is that within 500 feet? Because it's not from the front entrance of that first floor one? Can you measure up and down too?
So typically it's measured horizontally, but I think what I'm hearing, if this board provides feedback that you may be amenable to, well, that's something that you'd want to clarify. But in my mind, that would not meet.
They're in the same building.
Same lot, same building.
Same building.
Okay. All right. My comments. So, so I think as I read through this weekend, and then, you know, as Mike did, I spent a considerable amount of time looking for, I guess, real evidence that the location of firearms retailers has a material impact on things like school shootings, mass shootings. And I literally probably read 20 articles, you know, and I could not find anything that directly tied proximity of where guns are sold to these actual events. So with that said, I would generally say the two reasons that I can come to the conclusion why I answer question one personally, Jeff, do we need to change the status quo and amend the zoning bylaws? Yes, and it's the two reasons that Chief Chambers is before us asking for those. One, so that a full review of the applicant's security policy can be developed in line with local police department as they're putting in their application. And two, as I consider all of the feedback, and I've read all of the emails that have been sent to this board from the community on both sides of this issue, you know, the other reason that I think is as a resident of the town, I'm personally far less concerned if an outdoor store were to open up in Westford Valley Marketplace and they sold camping equipment and fishing gear and hunting equipment. I don't feel concerned about that situation at all. The situation that did exist in the Littleton Mill, where you have a large population of firearms dealers in close proximity to one another, potentially lending itself to a situation that could be difficult and problematic for local police enforcement to stay on top of and control, I do take that very seriously. So those are the two reasons in my mind why I think a zoning bylaw at this point is appropriate. With that said, as I read through everything that's presented, and some of the folks in the audience kind of alluded to this, I sort of feel like we're sort of half here and half there on this issue. It's like half written that it should be a special permitting process, and half of it lends itself to site plan review. I would offer this feedback personally to the select board is if they want to regulate it to a number count of 3, then perhaps that should be a general bylaw amendment. It should be regulated similarly to alcohol, and they're the special permit granting authority, and they can limit the number of those, you know, retailers in town directly themselves. If they don't wish to go that route, and we want to do this as a zoning bylaw amendment, then I'm in agreement with, I think, most of the rest of the board. This is a site plan review process and not a special permitting process. And I have some other feedback in the context of if we're doing this as a zoning bylaw amendment. The first of which is in section, unfortunately, 6.6.6, the context map that is stated that the applicant will provide states 1,000 feet, not 500 feet. Now, so either that should be consistent with whatever the setback requirement is, so that this board gets a very clear picture of the setbacks that they need to be aware of while making their decision, or if the select board wishes the applicant to provide 1,000-foot view, then we need that 1,000 feet to also delineate what is within the 500 feet, if that's what the actual setback is. So if they're going to give us more, that's great, but we need to clearly know on that map what is within 500 feet.
And that was an unintentional oversight on my part. I didn't change 1,000 to 500.
Okay, well, no big deal. I have a question, and as Kate pointed out, this is a land use board. So when I looked at sort of where light manufacturing and retail sales to the general public are allowed, I was struck by, if we're doing this in a site plan review process, why is industrial A and industrial B zone parcels not permitted for firearm sales?
So I guess what I would say is during some of the initial comments that we heard from the public, there was a lot of concern for proximity to schools, proximity to residential zoning districts. And so just to start the conversation, we did look at the commercial highway and industrial highway, because by and large, that's generally located along Littleton Road. While there are other districts where industrial uses might be allowed, such as IA, as we know from other recent conversations, they're often frequently surrounded by residential uses. And so if there was, initially, there was a suggested setback to the residential districts, that would have wiped out a lot of those opportunities. So just as a starting point, they weren't included. They certainly could be, but we're looking for direction to go one way or another here.
I think it makes sense to kind of limit it to the 110 corridor.
Well, I know we do like to put everything on 110. It's the answer to all of our problems in town, I get that.
And it's close to my house.
So that was an observation, is I couldn't reconcile why, since the underlying uses are permitted in industrial A and B, why those would have been left out. So I do think there is some visibility that select board items get by the public as opposed to the planning board. So if we're speaking about what board should be hearing these topics, and should it be special permit from the select board, I think in general the residents of the town are paying attention to that agenda perhaps more often than the planning board agenda. We tend to hear a lot, I didn't know about this, we heard it tonight, like I didn't even know there was a hearing to hear this topic. So I do have some concerns that if we are doing this as site plan review at this board, we're going to have potentially situations in the future where people claim they didn't know that this was a topic. We all know that they can monitor that. But, so, those are my pieces of feedback.
Can I add, because when you said site plan review criteria, I noticed I had comments on that, 667.
Yeah.
That the establishment is designed to minimize any adverse impacts on abutters or pedestrians, and I wasn't sure why pedestrians was included in there. What, the siting of a retail established, yeah, what does that have to do with pedestrians?
But isn't that part of our review anyway?
That's part of our review, so that's.
It is, I mean, her point, maybe it's a little redundant, we would do that anyway with traffic, right?
Yeah.
So, but,
Easily take that out.
Well, I guess I just, I didn't understand why it was there. And the next one, will not be detrimental to the public health, safety, and welfare of the neighborhood. And I have trouble with that if it's going to be a site plan review, because those are squishy. I mean, they're good special permit ones where you have the latitude of deciding what public health means, what the neighborhood means.
yeah.
But if it's a strict site plan review, that language is not good.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's
What
it.
was your feeling, Dylan, on setbacks?
Oh, yeah, so on setbacks specifically, the one in here that I can get behind is E, other firearms businesses, because again, for the reasons that Chief Chambers has mentioned to us. The other ones, my personal opinion on that, again, based on reading 20-odd articles on whether or not proximity of where guns are purchased to where shootings happen has a correlative effect, I couldn't find anything, so I feel like if anything, that would be us, honestly, as a community, more value signaling than anything else.
Yep.
So, with that, we need to answer your 5 questions. Those are all my comments, unless there's more dialogue by the board. We can go on to getting to the 5 questions if you like, Jeff.
That would be appreciated.
Great.
One additional one, if you don't mind, Dylan.
Yeah, please, Darren.
So on 667 site plan review, Chief Chambers, you had mentioned a little earlier about, our site plan review is looking at bushes and lighting and all that kind of stuff, where yours is a little bit different. We talk about in number 1, that the site is laid out in such that it provides for convenient, safe, secure access and all that kind of stuff. I think we should add in there, and public safety considerations.
I wouldn't object.
Yeah. I would say that makes sense.
Okay, sounds reasonable.
Good.
That ties in with my comments about the color and stuff, where things should be reviewed by
Yeah.
the department.
Well, that's good, thank you. Okay, so let's move on to try to address these questions specifically for Jeff. So, I guess question number 1, Jeff, if I understand it, is do we need to change the status quo and amend the zoning bylaw? So I guess we'll do this sort of informally then. So is there anyone who does not think we need to amend the zoning bylaw?
I think the only value, as you stated, was to be able to do the coordination with the police department.
Right. Bob, are you in agreement with that?
Yes.
Okay. So, sounds like that's unilateral yes, Jeff, for the reasons that the chief has requested. All right. There's a sub-item 1 there. If so, do you agree with the proposed zoning districts for citing the firearms businesses? I think the only person I heard question that was me, and I asked, specifically why not industrial A and B, since the underlying uses in question, light manufacturing and retail sales to the general public, are supported there. So it would seem to me to be consistent.
Potentially. So for instance, the one applicant that came before you folks, their particular business model, it was retail sales to the general public, but it also, because of assembly, included light manufacturing with not more than 4 employees. So some businesses might not have a light manufacturing component,
right,
and some might, and maybe they have less retail. I don't know, but it can vary depending on the actual makeup of a firearm business.
Yes, but both,
by and large,
both
you would
uses
yep.
are permitted by right in industrial A and B. So even if they only had 1 of 2, they wouldn't need to have both.
There is some chart with yellow highlighting in there that calls out where they're currently.
I believe actually industrial A and B doesn't limit the light manufacturing to under 4 people.
Right, so that is actually, so industrial A and B, the most recent proposal, because it was light manufacturing with not more than 4, that actually it would not be permitted as of right. It would be prohibited in the IAIB.
Got it.
And yet it would be permitted in, if it were light manufacturing, it would be permitted as of right in IA and IB.
Right. That's
So-
where it gets a little kind of confusing.
I think that's another issue with our zoning bylaw, but we're staying focused
Yeah,
tonight.
okay, so at the end of the day, it's not to the extent that I think anything needs to change. I think you've heard that we don't have any issues with
What
the
if-
districts.
In the proposal, though, it also included the industrial part up on Route 40. I think
Did
that
it?
was one of the zones that you were suggesting, or no?
So if we're talking about a zoning district, at this point, we'd be talking about an entire zoning district. If you're talking about only part of a zoning district, then that screams, unfortunately, of a dreaded overlay.
So, because like where Newport Materials and
There is-
Fletcher Granite,
Yep. Yep, there is,
because there's other parts of town that,
It's an industrial A.
Yeah, that's IA.
but are there other parts of town?
Yes, there are.
Okay, the other ones up there and such.
But
okay.
there's also some, actually, I think 12 North Main Street, Bridge Street, that area, Broadway, a little
Okay.
bit of Broadway.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not,
It's not, yeah, it's
It's
not
spread out.
restricted, okay. All right, so
Okay,
that's why they're not on the list.
there you go. Okay, so I think in general, we agree with the proposed zoning districts. Is that fair?
Correct.
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Do you think that a special permit should be required for firearms businesses? Well, I think I heard 1, 2, 3. Bob, where did you come down on special permit versus site plan?
I'm flexible on that one, to be honest. I think I prefer the site plan, but I would at this point. But I'm fine with a special permit as long as we have all the necessary controls. And in the language I see here, I think we do.
So, I mean, I guess this is going to be, is this going to be a vote?
Well, I had requested that we see language from other towns. I mean, we're not doing anything tonight. I propose we don't make any final stuff tonight. I think this is part of an ongoing dialogue. So I would, before maybe we vote, give an opinion on that, we get some more.
Well, I don't think we're giving a board opinion, we're just in our individual opinions.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, personally, I'd like to, before I say, I'd like to see some examples.
So in the spirit of sort of giving feedback back to the select board, similar to what we got in our packet, it sounds like 3 of 5 were leaning towards site plan review. 2 were sort of between site plan review and special permit. And I guess the board isn't closed to the idea of a special permit, but we would want to understand more what sort of additional authority that that would give us if we were to be the granting authority for those special permits.
Okay, that's good.
Okay. All right, we're on to 3.
Well, if there is a special
Oh.
permit granting authority,
Yep.
who do you think that should be?
Us.
If it's for the zoning things, it should be the planning board. But I kind of, Dylan you presented a good thing, like things like limiting the numbers. I agree, that should probably be a select board thing. And are there other general bylaw types of things that where the select board would have authorities to do yay or nay, or?
So no, it's,
I believe Paul Fassbender in his comments sort of cited the firearms language that's in the general bylaws, and I would call it sparse. So I would encourage the select board to perhaps consider the general bylaws of the town as well as the zoning bylaws as they continue to think about this issue.
so one of the, and I don't certainly have all the answers, but where the select board, where there is a limitation on number of licenses for alcohol establishments, that comes from the state, from above.
Yep.
So there's a process called out for that. And I'm not saying it isn't possible, I'm simply saying I think that's in a different category right now, but it's something that, you know, they can certainly explore if they'd like to. But I'm just saying I don't know that it's as easy as that, but we can certainly ask the question.
Yeah, I mean, I know we heard this evening from a member of the audience that there's more aggressive controls in place in, say, the city of Newton than here. I have not read those bylaws, so I know that you mentioned that those were, that you considered those in this draft. I don't know how directly they were considered or if they were just sort of referenced as a data point, so.
So we're happy to share, you know, all the examples that we did look through.
Yep.
So we can caveat some of the takes of the board tonight, stating that, you know, while they may be voting this way, they do want to have benefit of the additional information, and, you know, their current opinions could be subject to change.
Yeah. I think Kate's comments, you know, about being purposeful and not rushing this. I know that there's a lot of interest in the community to get something going quickly, and I can completely appreciate that. At the same time, I think we've also heard people questioning an adult entertainment use in the zoning bylaw that, in my now pushing 7 years on this board, has never once come before us and was drafted sometime before I started here. So, you know, I think we should be thinking about anything we do on this subject as something that needs to be written carefully so it can stand the test of time.
Sure.
Okay. Are we on to item 3 then?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So setback buffers between firearm businesses and a list of 5 items.
Schools,
Well, if you are considering just the commercial highway and industrial highway zoning districts, to my knowledge, the only formal school that applies is Neshoba Valley
right.
Technical High School.
Right.
And the child care centers, we have the Goddard and KinderCare.
Yeah.
We actually have a number of them. We did get the list of licensed childcare facilities from the state, so.
So that's kind of like the same thing with businesses that cater to tutoring and such. If there's a child care center where they're licensed to have up to 6 kids versus KinderCare that can have, I don't know what, 30, 40, is there a difference?
So there are different categories. There's child care centers that you might think of more commercial. There's family home child care. I may be butchering the term. So one limit, it's cut off at 6, another might be 10, and then there's the full-on commercial. So, but can we go back to schools?
Yeah.
We see. So do you think there should be a setback to schools?
How I'll make your job easy. The only one of these that I absolutely 100% agree with is other firearms businesses. That's
agree with
clear, and I mean, that's being asked by, you know, the person who's most responsible for the safety of the community, Chief Chambers, who's with us this evening. That's the one that I feel most strongly about.
Agreed.
So you all agree on other firearm businesses?
Bob, do you have opinion here on number 3 question?
The only other point I was going to make is we talked about the child care centers, but I guess we just did talk about the what's the language here? Primary purpose to serve persons under age 18, and what comes to mind for me that is one-stop fund, which should be factored in, correct?
Well,
Yeah, it was.
That would be, yep.
Yeah, Jeff mentioned that license.
And the other question there is, do we have other businesses that we haven't discussed here in other areas of the districts?
Well, he included things, he had a list of 10 businesses that cater towards primarily school-age people.
I missed that.
Yeah, so like you want to tell him, like the Goldfish Place on Liberty Way, and, but then there were some businesses in the shopping plazas here.
Code Whiz, Kumon Math and Reading Center, Sylvan Learning Center, a couple of martial arts facilities, gymnastics, owl therapy. And these are the ones that we looked through the commercial highway and industrial highway. We did not go outside of that for now because other districts were not yet being considered, so.
Bob, do you agree with the existing firearm businesses? Setback?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so we're unanimous on 3E, Jeff. So can we start back to the top of schools?
They're all covered except for the Neshoba Valley.
Yeah. The one to me that's the hardest is C, because if this board is going to do this under site plan review, that's the one that's going to get us into having to interpret what that means. So if there was, that would be the first one on my list to remove. I can offer that.
C.
Yeah.
I'd remove it.
Because again, we're going to have to get into, you know, primarily serve people under 18. I mean, that can be.
So I mean,
And like you had as the examples, somebody sets up their business and then a tutoring place moves in next door, you know.
you've got a firearms next to Demoulas, right? During the afternoon, how many parents are bringing their kids to Demoulas, right? It's if it's unsafe to be next to a child care facility, it's unsafe to be next to the supermarket.
Well, I think it's also a little different, because I think, Jeff, you said you borrowed some of that language from the marijuana bylaw.
Yes.
Which is a little different animal, because, you know, you don't need a license to go in to buy marijuana. So it's a little bit different animal, I think.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree, that's a good point.
Yeah.
I think we've got, how
Probably.
many, where are you at on schools, Kate?
Schools, it doesn't matter if it makes people, if it gives them a sense of security, I'm okay with having it in there. Same with child care centers. The IC is the one I had issue with.
Yeah, C needs to be either more clearly defined. I don't have a problem with A, B, and D if we want to include those. I don't know that it actually makes a material difference from a safety perspective. But if we want to include them, that's fine. What I don't want is this board to be subject to scrutiny for decisions that we make on whether or not, you know, different businesses in town primarily cater to 18-year-olds or not.
Understood.
I agree with that.
So.
And religious use is, you know, I know a religious organization owns a parcel of property on 110.
We counted that one.
But they haven't even built their, you know, just because they own it is.
I would agree with Dylan. A, B, and C, A, B, and D are fine with me. E is the one that I'm, you know, most in favor of. And C I can do without.
Is there unanimous consensus on this, or where are we?
I would exclude everything but E, but.
It's not unanimous.
Not unanimous.
All right, can we,
So Darren and I are on fine with everything except for C, but primarily interested in E.
okay,
Mike is interested in exclusively E, it sounds like.
Correct.
exclusively E. Okay.
Definitely E, definitely not C, and the others are,
She's in the same camp as Darren.
Is there anyone in favor of C?
Bob?
Bob?
I see it as problematic. So, yeah, if we put that in, that's going to be a tough one to determine that's the primary purpose in all cases. Because I think I just heard somebody talk about karate, and that could be a problem. It's easy for me to see that One Stop and other such facilities are catered to age 18 and under. But, yeah, so I definitely A, B, D, and E understand, agree, but I'm on the fence on C because of the ability to get that language so that it's accurate and enforceable.
So is that 4 yeses for C, and are you abstaining?
that's 4 no's for C.
4 no's.
Okay, 4 no's, and Bob, are you
He's
on the
saying no.
fence?
Nope. 4 of us?
No, I don't like it as it's worded now, so I'm a no on that.
Okay,
4 of us are in the same camp. We'll
Okay.
take all of it except for C. One of us only likes C.
Correct.
D, E,
E.
all right.
E.
So schools, I hear some no's, but I also heard some I'm okay
I would
with.
say 4 maybes.
We're okay with it.
Yeah, 4 of us are fine with A, B, and D.
Okay,
Although there is some skepticism that that actually does anything to actually increase public safety.
so you're willing to,
But we're willing to have them in the bylaw because we don't think they necessarily
okay,
hurt.
and so that's just 1 no, 1 no.
Very well put.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we've gotten through 3, I think.
Yes.
You can confirm? Great.
Yes.
All right, we're on to 4. Do you think there should be a limit on the total number of firearm businesses in town?
As I said, I'm not opposed to it, just because, again, I don't want to see what happened in Littleton happen here, so I'm not opposed to that.
So my thought with Littleton, it was that was right to happen, right? They allowed them all in one place, and they were all commingling. I mean, if we have the protections that we're gonna put in here, there wouldn't be the ability to have 80 gun licenses in this town. There's not 80 spaces, and there wouldn't be any competition. So, I mean, that's my thought on it. I don't know, and that's why I don't want to limit it. I think the market should drive what's in the.
So in general, I agree with you. I think the market dictates how much of any business a market can support based on people going out and buying something. The thing in this case that's interesting to me, and actually, Chief Chambers, if you have an opinion on this, the situation in Littleton came about because they cannot have that kind of license and do that out of their home based upon mass law, right? So in Massachusetts, these folks, if they want to have a federal firearm permit to sell weapons, which gives these folks access to certain kinds of accessories or firearms that the general public would not have, right?
Right.
So in order to do that, they have to establish a business somewhere. So this is a different case because I think you may have people who are going out to open these businesses not for the intention of actually selling anything, but because they want to take advantage of some of the benefits that having that kind of license affords them.
Yes.
So I generally agree with you. Let the market decide how much of this thing. But I think in this case, we're faced with a unique situation where you may have people who are getting into business not to actually make money off this enterprise.
Right, but I think that in that scenario, right, you did have a piece of property that was divided up into little rooms
Yep.
that you could rent and put a sign out saying that's my business.
Yep.
Well, if we can't do that within 500 feet, I mean, there's not gonna be
I
that
agree.
opportunity.
No, I agree
know?
with you. I agree with you. I think what's happening here, or if the select board wanted to approach this as there can be 3 and it's a special permitting process like liquor licenses and they're gonna distribute them, I think you get there.
Kate?
Looking at where they could go and such, I have trouble with limiting it, one is definitely too restrictive. 3, again, that's bordering over restrictive. A number like 10, at that point, it's just the same as not having any restrictions.
Is that a no?
Probably a no, yeah.
Well, Bob, what are your thoughts on question 4? Do you think there should be a limit to the total number of firearms businesses in town?
I do initially. I'd like to see us put a limit. I think something in the range of 3 to 5 would be reasonable, and that would allow us as a community to monitor what's happening, and we could always adjust it in the future. But I don't want to see it be unlimited. I think we need to keep control on this as we monitor the types of applications that we're seeing, and we can adjust accordingly after that.
So I think if you ask the question a different way, Jeff, and the question to the board was, does anybody think we should have 80 firearms businesses in town? I think the board is going to answer that no.
Or 20.
I don't know about that, but
That's
I
true.
definitely know 80. I assume everybody would answer probably we don't need that many firearms businesses in town. But if you're asking, should there be this number? I don't know. What I'd be curious to understand is, based upon these setbacks and the approved areas where this could go, what do we think the number we would reasonably be at based on what's in this bylaw amendment draft? What do we think a realistic number looks like based on these steps?
If there were no limits.
If there was no, cap on top of this, what would this number look like?
Right, and so we started looking at that. And so, of course, it depends on which buffers if you choose to implement. So if you're looking at schools, childcare centers, facilities where, children commonly congregate, the religious uses, if you're still looking, if you're still looking at all those, you can look at the chunks of land that are left that are either the CH, which is the sort of bluish, greenish, whatever, and then you've got the IH. So, and everything on the far west side of town, I'm generalizing here, but it's pretty much Kimball's and Neshoba right now. So for practical purposes, I wouldn't consider that necessarily viable practically in the short term. You have a few pockets. If you have the 500-foot separation between firearm businesses, maybe you can get a couple in that large area, but you got to remember that some of these are developed properties. Some of them may have some restrictions in perpetuity that relate to affordable housing requirements, and so there's some of those properties that, while they may be in the zoning district, it may not be practical to develop. They may be burdened or restricted in some manner. There's also areas of significant wetland resource areas. So if you look at these things, you have like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-ish, maybe 6 pockets. Only some of those pockets are large enough to be able to house multiple, firearm businesses while meeting the 500-foot setbacks. So I think you're in and of yourself, if you just take the buffers shown here, practical considerations, there might be, 10 or fewer, and then that doesn't include market. You have to also find a piece of dirt where the property owner wants to actually
Let you be there.
let you be there. So, and again, it's not an exact science, and things can change at the drop of a hat. So we don't know, but it does seem there's only so many pockets. I think some of them are practically constrained for many purposes, and then others just may not be viable because of property owner.
Yeah.
And most of these pockets are generated because of the item C, I believe.
A lot of them are, yes.
So if you remove that, it opens it up a little bit.
Right.
Like where the mouse is right there. Most of those ones along you just got rid of C.
Yeah. So that's what you would have without C, the child activities.
So that obviously is a lot more.
Yeah. Interesting.
But I think it's a good question to pose to the select board. Do they feel that they should be the ones to restrict the number of?
Right.
Is that a valid way to do it?
Yeah.
Because we don't restrict anything else in our zoning bylaws.
Well, that's what I'm thinking about.
You do, registered marijuana dispensaries.
But that was because of the law and the vote and the town meeting vote and all, you know.
But, again, that's restricted by,
Zoning.
yeah, but are we, so if well, we regulate no recreational marijuana dispensaries, we could in theory have one, I believe, medical, and that would come before this board, and we would be the one to grant that, right?
Yeah.
Yes. You are the special permit granting authority for that. So it sounds like we have one that is definitely in favor of limiting the total number, somewhere between 3 and 5. It sounds like we have at least 3 no's, and then we have a maybe?
I would go more with Bob, that, you know, given this, what's a reasonable number to start with? 3, 5, maybe 5. It's hard to say.
Yeah.
I don't know what a good number to start with is.
So we have 2 on the 3 to 5. We've got 2 that are no, and then on the fence?
I would put myself on the fence as well. I mean, I'm not saying some reasonable, you know, again, it's gotta be a reasonable number, but, you know, I'm definitely not 80.
No, 79.
Yes, yeah, right. I'm definitely not 80.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I'm 3 to 5 either.
Are you 7-ish?
Sure.
10 or less, 10 or?
7 is where I would start to raise an eyebrow and say, the town I moved into is quite different now.
Okay. We still have 1 no, 1 maybe?
3 to 5.
3 to 5. All right, so we have 3 to 5, 1 no, and 1 7-ish.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful.
All right, so question 5. Does the planning board have any interest in sponsoring or jointly sponsoring a zoning bylaw amendment relative to firearms? So I think I heard at least 3 people say that we should. 1, 2. Bob, were you saying yes, we should sponsor?
Yes.
Yeah. And Darren?
Yeah, I just think with our site plan review experience, it makes sense.
Yeah, if it's gonna be site plan review, it should be yes.
I would just caveat that with my deliberate moving forward, I do not agree with what our new town manager wrote with proposing like a special permit, special town meeting just to deal with this. I think if sponsoring it, but having it in one of our regularly scheduled
Process, public hearings and, yes.
I do not believe it's a good use of town money town funds to have a special town meeting just sometime in the summer for this. The earliest this would could possibly be ready to even, with the timelines, would be June, and you're in school vacation time, and June, July, and by then you're almost at your October meeting anyway, so I'm okay with sponsoring it. I just don't believe in forcing it sooner than we normally do. I don't feel there's an urgent need to do that.
So was that 5 to sponsor? What about co-sponsor? Just sponsor?
Co-sponsoring would be, I mean, if all of us were in on sponsoring, I assume all of us would be willing to co-sponsor?
Why would, at that point, why would we want them to co-sponsor?
Well, I think one thing would be notice, right? If,
yeah.
Well, they're gonna give their opinion whether or not, their
I mean, the only reason I would say co-sponsor is that people pay attention to the selectmen more than they do us.
Yeah.
We don't wanna get to town meeting when we didn't know about this, you know? But I don't know that we need to just co-sponsor specifically.
Wasn't there something about both boards, Jeff, what's the status on that? There was some discussion, I can't remember if it was an email I saw from somebody in town,
Yeah.
or if it was actually in the packet. It was at some point something about a multi-step process that would involve both boards.
There was some discussion at the select board meeting about who should be the special permit granting authority if one was required. There was a suggestion that perhaps it be comprised of multiple members of both planning board and select board,
Yep.
which would effectively be creating a new board. I think town council hinted that that might be challenging and that they could look into it more if that was the will of the select board. But I don't know that they're actively investigating it yet. The other thing is I don't know what this recent communication people are referring to about the town manager calling for a special town meeting.
It was a suggestion if we followed this.
Oh, so that could have stemmed from the original timeline, because we got questions about, you know, if someone decided to sponsor, which no one, well, maybe now you're there, but if someone decides to sponsor it, there are certain logistical things and timeframes, you know, called out. So I don't think she's suggesting that we have a special town meeting, just that if one were to happen, this is the time frame that would.
But I think people read that and assumed that was what was being recommended.
Okay, understood. So I think, Joe, unless I'm missing something, I think that's the input we're looking for.
So we've answered your questions?
One question.
Yeah.
Just if it becomes site plan and it's subject to the chief's approval of the security.
Yeah.
I wonder, is it, I wonder how limiting the chief can be in, you know, in the security plan, in that, you know, look, your security is not good enough. Say we go to agree without buffers, right? And there's one next door. And the chief security plan, they don't satisfy his concern that there is one close enough. Does he report his concerns to us and then we vote on it, or do we wait for his approval before? How do you envision that working?
So there's two different parts there. So one is the zoning arm, whereby you would be looking to have an efficient process that's actually to the advantage of the applicant, in my opinion, is to have the one review process where your jurisdiction could overlap with elements of a security plan. That's to the applicant's benefit, and that's good. It prevents repetitive trips to the planning board after a public hearing. So that's the intent of that. Separate from what you folks would do is outside of zoning, and that is what the police chief does. His department reviews, and they have to approve each of these establishments. So you could approve something, and if they do not provide an adequate security plan, then he's not going to issue, that he has to have grounds to say, I can't do this. But sure, there's an appeal process for that.
But it's not like, say, that when the fire chief says, you know, I don't like this road, and we can deliberate whether or not to change the road. He has to approve it before they can actually get the permit, right? It's not based upon his recommendation. That's, okay. I want to make sure that was clear.
That's a good question, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So, what are the next steps?
We're going to try to memorialize this as soon as possible. And perhaps we can send a draft, at least to the chair to review as a sanity check before we forward that to the town manager to share with the select board.
That would be great. Thank you.
And appreciate your patience and indulgence.
Yes.
And the patience of everybody who's still here.
Yes. Absolutely. And so you don't need a continuance of this, right?
No, it's not a public hearing. I'm sure, you know, there may be, who knows what will come from when the select board reviews your takeaways. But, you know, that's the next step, is we summarize this and give that information to them.
Yeah. We did hear from members of the public tonight about, you know, expediency and collaboration, I think, between different groups within the town. So I guess, would anybody on this board be opposed if the select board wanted to? We had talked, I think, at one point about maybe a joint meeting or something like that. Do you see that as something that might be needed? In other words, is it helpful when you go back to the select board if we were to decide if we were amenable to take a joint meeting with them or something, if they want to continue to work on this collaboratively?
It certainly wouldn't hurt. Obviously, we can't control what, you know, they want to do, but I know there's been requests by the public for that.
Yeah.
But I don't know, does the select board want to receive and digest this information first, or do they want to just, you know, I don't have that answer for you. But
I'd be fine with that.
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Bob?
question.
Would you be amenable if the select board would like to have a joint meeting as a next step on their side to discuss this and kind of refine the language? Would you be amenable to that?
I think that was a yes.
I'm amenable.
He's amenable.
So there you go. We would be willing to collaborate with them if they'd like to do that.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
At the last planning board meeting, I had asked, but I didn't get an answer.
Can you get to the microphone so
Yeah,
we can hear
we
you?
need you there, and name and address for the record, please.
Chris Klintz, Texas Road. At the last planning board meeting, I had asked, but I didn't get an answer, and I didn't know if one would be forthcoming. I know that this looks like it's going to be a lengthier process to get something to come before the town, whether it's at this town or, October town meeting or some special town meeting or what have you elsewhere. But in the meantime, is there a way that the town could, or a board, could call a moratorium on all applications until we can get the question resolved? I know other towns have done moratoriums on things that normally just go through and proceed, and people think they can do it, and they say, no, we're gonna just call a halt until either this date or until this condition gets satisfied.
So I believe I asked this question when we heard from the applicant during the public hearing process for 359 Littleton.
So my opinion, I think that would still require a town meeting vote in order to get a moratorium. And so at the time, we had suggested the most expedient thing would be to have a public hearing notice published as soon as possible. So I don't know if it's possible for a moratorium, but I do believe that would take town meeting to do, so you would still need town meeting. And at the time of that question, this town meeting was not, to my understanding, a viable option at
Right,
that point.
I understand that. So it would not be permissible for the planning board to say we're having a moratorium on this, or for the select board to say that? It
Well,
would have to be the town? The whole town has to say that?
I think it takes town meeting to enact a moratorium on something in zoning, I thought.
Yeah, I can't see how we
well,
could
I'll amend what I've stated, if we could always open a public hearing in May or something, because that's the first one where we would be able to do the 2 notices, and you just don't close it until October.
Well, we would need, so first of all, we need a sponsor, and we need real language. I'm not discrediting anything that is here, it's to facilitate discussion, but the other thing is there are some limitations on how far the public hearing can open in advance of town meeting. I do think it could be as much as 6 months, but don't hold me to that right now, please. But I think it's that far, so we'd have to
You have to look into it.
We'd have to look into that.
I did see in WestfordCAT published something today that said a hearing would be opened April 1st for this topic, and it would be closed May 3rd. Are those the correct
And
dates?
that was their misinterpreting.
Okay, it was just, that's where you may have,
That was on WCAT?
yes, today.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. All right. Any further discussion on this item?
I would just thank staff for compiling all those
Absolutely.
comments over the last month.
Yeah, that's a lot of
All
work
those
you've done.
meetings and
Yeah.
lot of work there.
Thank you very much. We had a lot of help from our staff and police department, so.
Thank you, Chief, as well.
Thank you, Chief, for your work on
And
this.
someday we'll get around to our subdivision rules
Ah,
and regulations
It's 9:30, Kate.
Yeah. Okay.
and other pressing matters.
All right, that brings us to the end of our general business topics. The next item would generally be to review meeting minutes. However, we have no meeting minutes this evening, so we will not be reviewing meeting minutes.
Correspondences.
Yeah, there is a correspondence in the correspondence reports and updates section. An advisory concerning enforcement of the MBTA community zoning law. Jeff?
So, the short version, Mr. Chair, is that, as you folks may be aware, Westford is under an obligation to adopt a multifamily housing zoning district that is as of right, with a minimum density of 15 units per acre by the end of calendar year 2024. Chapter 3A states right now that failure to do so will result in ineligibility from certain grant programs. But what the governor is now stating, not only, that's not the only item, you're not just going to be ineligible for grants, you're going to be in violation of state law.
Gonna be fined.
And subject to significant penalties. So they want to make it clear that, you know, there will be repercussions above and beyond lack of grant opportunities.
And this is where we thank our staff again for being proactive here
And on top of this.
and on top of this.
A lot of team effort, a lot of outreach with a lot of boards, committee members, and potential stakeholders. So we appreciate their efforts too.
And since I won't be around for the discussion, I just want to reiterate, it says you can't impose age-based occupancy limitations and that it has to be, you can't restrict it to no, should be eligible for families with children. But there's nothing in what we've been given that says you cannot do income.
Affordability?
Well, not just the state's affordability, but like the town could look at things like surrounding the surrounding area, their median income levels, so that we could say a certain percent should be available to people who meet within this, so that we take care of the really poor, not really poor, but, the lower part, and we take care of the people who can afford luxury. And even though this says is to get housing out there for the people who need it, there's nothing in the language of the state thing that makes it so regular people can afford it. So I'm hoping when you do deliberate on this that you will take the average family into account and try to make it so that young people can afford an apartment, young families can afford apartments, seniors can afford apartments. That's I'll keep pushing on that as long as I can.
You're going to be calling in.
He is. She is. We have a special guest.
Unfortunately, my replacement was on the Affordable Housing Committee, so we've already talked about this.
Okay. There you
You can still come to the meeting.
I can see everyone's phone's going to be ringing. Kate's calling.
go. Affordability, she's texting me. No, well, but a good point. Great. Well, that brings us to the end.
Motion to adjourn?
Adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
Second. All those in favor to adjourn, say aye. Bob?
Aye.
Kate?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Darren? Aye. And I say aye. Thank you and have a good evening.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.